In this segment, you will see the evidence that Kennedy was killed in a conspiracy using more than one gunman. Our first guest is Dr. Cyril Wecht, a world-renowned forensic pathologist. He has been the coroner for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and past president for the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. He was the first non-government pathologist to examine the medical evidence concerning President Kennedy's assassination. Dr. Wecht, how does the evidence prove that there was more than one gunman?
First, Mr. Jones, we have to understand the predicament that the government found itself in. When they analyzed the alleged murder weapon, the Mannlicher Carcano, non-automatic bolt-action weapon developed before World War II in Italy, they determined that it took 2.3 seconds from shot to shot without allowing time for repositioning, re-aiming at a moving target. Then when they examined the Zapruder film, frame by frame, they saw that John Connally was completely non-reactive 1.5 to 1.6 seconds after Kennedy had already been hit in the throat. And that is what gave birth to the single bullet theory, that one shot came through Kennedy's back, through his neck, then through Connally's chest, through Connally's wrist, and to Connally's left thigh. And that is what permitted them to say that Oswald was a sole assassin. And if you see right here, there is John Connally's hat. I'm going to clear that a moment so we can first see his face. You'll see that there is no reaction whatsoever. Now, look at the white Stetson hat he's holding in his right wrist. Look at Kennedy, of course, having been struck. 1.5 to 1.6 seconds have elapsed, and John Connally, according to the single bullet theory of the Warren Commission, has been shot through the chest. The right wrist has been fractured. The nerve that permits the thumb to hold things in apposition with the fingers has been severed. The bullet's gone into the thigh, and he sits there totally unreacting.
Now, you might have covered this, but why couldn't one bullet have hit Connally and Kennedy?
The bullet that was found on the stretcher at the hospital, the hero of the single bullet scenario, in its original weight was 161 grains. The bullet that was found weighed 158.6 grains, a loss of 1.5% of the original weight of the bullet. And yet, when you look at the x-rays of these two men, you see fragments of the bullet in 4 anatomic locations, with a significant fragment having been removed from the governor's wrist and another piece to this day remaining in his left leg. If you put all these together, you clearly have in excess of 1.5% of the original weight. If you look at the bullet, Mr. Jones, you'll see this is Commission Exhibit 399, the stretcher bullet, the magic bullet as the critics prefer to call it. This bullet is absolutely pristine. It's a 6.5 millimeter, fully copper jacketed, except at the base, lead core piece of military ammunition. The nose, the cone of the bullet, which allegedly destroyed 4 inches of the governor's right fifth rib and caused a comminuted or shattered fracture of the distal radius, a dense, heavy bone in a man Connally, a little taller than you even, that this bullet, according to them, broke both those bones and yet emerged in this pristine condition, losing only 1.5% of its original weight. And that is why that one bullet could not have produced those wounds. The other reason, of course, is the trajectory. If you look at this trajectory of the model that is portrayed here, you see that under the Warren Commission scenario, the bullet had to have entered Kennedy's back, and by the way, they revised that wound. It was placed several inches higher than they did on the night of the autopsy. And then they say it went through his neck. And as it was going out to the left and downward and forward, it would have had to have stopped in midair, come back about 18 inches, and then gone into John Connally's right posterior axillary area, which is a fancy way for saying right behind the armpit. And then, when it came out, it saw the wrist over here, and it said, hey, let's get the wrist in too. It reached over, got his wrist, shot I showed you before, holding the white Stetson hat, and then it moved downward. Now, the angle through Connally's chest was downward about 25 degrees. The angle from the chest to the thigh was downward at 45 degrees, and yet the angle through Kennedy was upward at about 7 degrees. So we've got then a bullet which does incredible gyrations like a roller coaster at an amusement park, moving horizontally and vertically at different times depending on whatever you need of it.
Thank you, Doctor. We performed a test to find out if it was possible to have a bullet come out as the Warren Commission said it did. Larry Howard, the director of the JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas, an antique gun collector and expert marksman, performed this test.
This is a 6.5 Italian Mannlicher Carcano rifle. This rifle dates back to World War II. It's identical to the one found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository and that was allegedly used by Lee Harvey Oswald. The ammunition I'm going to fire is the same lot number allegedly used by Oswald. I got the ammunition from an antique gun collector and checked it with the information in the Warren Commission volumes. The rifle is not a very reliable gun. Many times it will misfire. Now, if that happens, we're going to have to take a second shot. The target is a combination of ballistic gel and bone. The ballistic gel assimilates the same properties of skin, and Dr. Wack suggested we use cow bones because they are very close to the consistency of human bone. Here we go. As you can see, the bullet I just fired is severely distorted. Now let's compare it to CE-399, which is in near pristine condition.
Dr. Weck, let's talk about medical evidence. Who performed the autopsy?
This is incredible. To do an autopsy on the President of the United States, dead as a result of multiple gunshot wounds, they called in 2 naval pathologists from Bethesda Naval Center here in D.C. who had never done a gunshot wound case, who had never performed medical legal autopsies, who were not forensic pathologists. And there was a third guy called over from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and he was in a bad situation, an Army man, in a naval setting, and he had limited experience himself. Instead of calling in top forensic pathologists who had been known and utilized by the United States government going back to World War II, and in many capacities subsequent thereto, they deliberately excluded those people because they all shared one common flaw. They were civilians and could not be ordered to do things.
Doctor, before you go on, let's talk with Dr. Charles Crenshaw, one of the doctors in the operating room when Kennedy was brought into Parkland Memorial Hospital. Dr. Crenshaw has written the book, JFK Conspiracy of Silence, in which he reveals many secrets he kept for over 28 years. Dr. Crenshaw, the Warren Commission told us that Kennedy was shot with 3 bullets, all from the back. Did you see evidence of anything different?
Yes, I saw definite evidence. I saw evidence of 2 wounds that came from the front. The head wound was tangential in nature, but it was a large avulsed area in the right rear part of the head. There was loss of part of the parietal, temporal, and most of the occipital lobe of the right cerebral hemisphere, with exposure of the cerebellum. It was about 2.5 to 2 3/4 inches in diameter, more or less circular in place, and had the appearance of an exit wound. When I saw the autopsy photos, there was no damage or no wound in the right rear area shown in 2 photographs.
Well, the autopsy picture, in the picture, the throat shows a 2-inch incision where a tracheotomy was performed. Is that what you remember seeing?
No, the second wound that I saw from the front was the anterior neck wound, which was 3 to 6 millimeters or less than a 1/4 inch in diameter. It was clearly demarcated, round, and relatively clean cut. When the endotracheal tube didn't work, Dr. Perry performed a tracheostomy through the entrance wound. The incision was sharp with smooth edges, about 1 to 1.5 inches long. I might add it was the same as when the tube was removed before he was put into the coffin. But the autopsy photograph showed a widely gaping wound with irregular edges about 2.5 to 3 inches long.
Doctor, why have you kept this information secret for so long?
Well, there was an edict of silence put out, but in deference to that physician, I believe it really meant that we in the room were not to use this intense personal experience for commercial gain or a head start in opening a new practice. However, that fraternal doctrine was kept for many years. I am now 59 years old and have completed the development of my department using Parkland as a model, and will continue only in a teaching and administrative capacity for the next few years. And lastly, I think I was naive. I always felt our country would provide the best possible post-mortem examination with the best physicians, and thereby would have the best investigation for our fallen president.
Thank you, Doctor. Would you please stay on the line with us? Now we turn to our new medical evidence. Dr. Wecht, how did this new evidence come to your attention?
Larry Howard, whom we saw a little bit ago, called me and told me that he had been looking at the photos of the president's head again, and something that had troubled him perhaps subliminally previously had come to the fore once again. And that was, Mr. Jones, a straight line with short hairs in the president's scalp. We're looking at the back of the president's head, and this is the nose up front. In other words, the president is lying supine on his back on the autopsy table. What Larry noted is this straight line with short hairs. Short hairs, not the kind found in someone with a full head of hair, but the kind found at the base of the scalp, at the hairline, where one gets a haircut and where the hairs are trimmed. In other words, what we're looking at here is a portion of the scalp that has been reflected upward from the rear or occipital area that Dr. Crenshaw was referring to, that has been now reflected back up thusly, giving us the picture of the straight line with short hairs that we see here.
What does that prove?
What it proves is that this picture is very likely revised, altered photo. It definitely proves, in conjunction with the Zapruder film that shows the president being hurled violently backward and to the left at the moment of impact of the headshot, and force equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. So we know the mass of the bullet, 161 grains, traveling almost 2,100 feet per second. A tremendous impact, and supposedly, according to the Warren Commission, he's being struck from the rear, but his body moves backward and to the left. When you take that and you correlate it with the description that Dr. Crenshaw and other doctors at Parkland Hospital, and a nurse and a Secret Service agent and a funeral director all said about a gaping defect in the right rear of the skull. When you look at these photos and you look at work that other people have been doing, including a colleague of mine, Mr. Tom Wilson in Pittsburgh and so on, you come to the conclusion that we're dealing with a big defect in the right rear of the skull, and the significance of that is that it was an exit wound, not an entrance wound. But there are other holes, too, in the head that I hope we'll have a chance maybe to talk about later.
Thank you, Doctor. Evidence like this usually never gets to the public. People who find it are often warned to keep quiet, or worse, are killed, like the case of Dallas policeman Buddy Walters.
He was called in to pick up an escaped convict at a motel. The court never even determined whether the gun that shot him was the policeman's gun or the escaped convict's gun.
You've seen the medical evidence that proves the fatal shot exited from the back. Before this program is over, you'll see other evidence and know how this conspiracy was carried out. But first, getting at the truth in this case has been a painstaking and dangerous occupation. As many as 177 people have died simply from knowing too much. The moment Kennedy was killed, a massive cover-up went into operation. Witnesses were threatened and many were killed.